Hello and welcome to the IBA helicopter market update. My name's Alastair Fallon, and I specialise in the helicopter market. IBA helicopter services, the list is quite clearly here. I'll leave you to have a look through those, but we do a lot of appraisal, valuations for new, for used, for the market, for investors, for owners, for lessors, etc. So please have a look in your own time. Here's just a sort of a brief summary, really, of what the actual global helicopter market entails. There's approximately 32,500 helicopters in use worldwide, 2/3 turbine. So there's various important facts there to take into account when you're considering aircraft. These are a very specialist type of aircraft. The helicopter is it's very much mission critical. It's unpressurized, and it keeps its value because it can be overhauled to nearly new status at any time during its life. So it generally got 30 to 40 years considered useful life. Economic life in that time can vary. Obviously, it can have its primary role, and it can quite easily, at times, it can quite easily be reconfigured and then be used in other secondary roles. There's more notes there about upgrades, reconfiguration, but most importantly, just at the end there, we'll come on to again, it's the helicopter market. It really consists of 5 separate sort of weight categories. So the helicopters are divided up and they're sort of classed like that. Okay, going forwards, let's have a look. I mentioned the 5 categories here. We have the light single engine class, the light twin engine. We've got the medium, the super medium, and the heavy. Now, what I'm trying to do here, I'm trying to clearly identify the proportion of each class that is either owned wholly by the operator, or it's leased to the operator. It's leased and it's in use. So you can see it gradually steps up. So the high-end, much more expensive helicopters, there's a greater proportion of those that are taken on lease. So the heavy helicopters, a large proportion of which we'll see later on, actually, a large proportion of that is used commercially. It's used offshore. So there's a great deal of configuration involved, and those helicopters, when they enter into service, are significantly more expensive than the other end of the scale. You've got light single-engine helicopters, which are cheaper. They're smaller. They have certainly got less endurance. They've got less capacity, etc. And an awful lot more of these are used privately, or they're used by companies. They're used for executive transportation, etc. Okay, just to go a little further here, I'm not going to go through all of this. You can please refer back to this in your own time, but it's just sort of a comparison between the leasing market, between fixed-wing commercial jets and the helicopter. So the helicopter itself, the helicopter is divided up into piston engine and turbine engine. A greater proportion, or a larger number certainly, of the turbine, they're used commercially and PARAPUBLIC. And going on from here, we're going to concentrate more so on them. But here, quite clearly, the commercial jet, which does rely on passenger service, up to 50% of that is already leased. So the operators, they lease their jets for service. The helicopters there's a smaller number, but that is growing. And as we saw on the previous slide, as you step up and you step through the different size and weight category, the heavier, larger helicopters, they do have up to 32% I've mentioned here. But if you take a step further on, actually in that class of heavy helicopter, the heavy class of helicopter that is configured for offshore support service, up to 50% of that fleet is actually on lease. So I'll leave that for you to have a look back at. So more significantly, we look back at deliveries. So deliveries and oil price, there is quite a close correlation between the price of oil and the delivery of new helicopters. Now, delivery of helicopters, that's generally on a backlog or a back order. So if you're ordering and you're buying helicopters today, you generally are not going to get it tomorrow, or you may get it several years later. So if you have a look at this graph, you'll see quite closely that the number of helicopters delivered, it rises with the oil price. So 2005, it's pretty close, 2006, so it does, and then it peaks in 2008 when there was a significant crash in the price of oil. So that plummeted. Helicopter deliveries continued, but they came in a downward trend, and they didn't begin to pick up again until oil price had picked up again. And then it sort of leveled out. Orders leveled, orders really declined pretty rapidly then. So it was 2014 when we begun to see the price of oil plummet again. And orders and deliveries have never really recovered since then. And the price of oil, if we have a look, we're talking about price of oil being up to 100, maybe over $100 a barrel. That was a peak season, so that was peak time for delivery of new helicopters, the requirement and the need for helicopters to support the high end, the heavy offshore helicopter. So as moving on back to much more recently, we can see 2020. Now we've already gone through about 2/3 of the year, so we're looking up to September, and there have been very few helicopters. There's been a variety of reasons for that, and we'll talk a little more about that as we go through the presentation. But earlier on this year, yes, there was a lot to do with the oil price. You can see the oil price coming down fairly rapidly from last year and the previous year. But we've had the global pandemic, which has really put the stoppers on a lot of new deliveries, and it even at some stage did put the halt on production. So the manufacturers, they had to press pause and send the work staff home. They had to reorganize before putting everything back into motion again. So they're back up and running, but deliveries, etc., are certainly behind any form of expected drag curve because of that. Moving on, we'll pick up a little more. Okay, now you can quite clearly see what has happened. I've got some detail here comparing year on year, so August 2020 versus August 2019. And I'm also doing August 2020 and I'm comparing with July 2020. So firstly, if we have a look at August this year, if we compare with August last year, and I'm going to focus mainly on the offshore. So we've got land and offshore rigs. So these are rigs, oil rigs, and then you've got the total. You can see the actual totals have dropped significantly compared with 12 months ago. So I'm going to look at oil though, as I've said. So oil international, and then you've got oil North America, and then there's the oil worldwide. So offshore worldwide was like 199 platforms in use. In August 2019, there was only 200, and there was 273. So a significant number more. Almost it dropped almost a third in that time. North America, it still hasn't recovered. It's still it's a little over 50% of what it was 12 months ago. And the international offshore number, again, it's down about 25 to 30% on numbers last year. So that's not too bad. But if we now compare August 2020 with July 2020, we can see that there is a stabilizing effect. There's a slight, very minor uptick, but the offshore rigs internationally have gone up. They've gone up, albeit they've gone up by one, but that is an improvement, and it's certainly showing you that there's a little stability creeping back in. North America, again, it too has stabilized, as has the world total. So it's a fraction more, and we would look at that continuing and leveling out as we go forward. Okay, moving on. I've got some detail here on actual deliveries and then forecast deliveries. Now, these were industry forecasts made earlier this year, and they haven't fully included the effects of the pandemic of COVID-19. So particularly if we look at 2020 in there, we've got deliveries up until September, so just shy of 200 helicopters have been delivered. Now that's 2/3 of the year. Now 2/3 of the year, if we add a third onto that, there's significantly less deliveries expected in 2020 now. I would then move that going forwards, and I would suggest there will be a reduction in all the future forecasts. I would suggest 20, maybe even 30% reduction in the numbers forecast earlier this year in future deliveries. So the numbers here don't include that reduction. Okay, so new unit deliveries then over the last 10 years. Here, the 4 main manufacturers are listed, and then there's an assortment of others that I have included as well. So these helicopters that have been delivered, you've got Airbus, Bell, Leonardo, and Sikorsky. And if you move along, you can see that the orders have juggled around a little, but the lead pack appears to be Airbus for most of the route down. So numbers are decreasing, they're diminishing for various reasons. I've already mentioned the effect oil has had, but 2020 we can certainly add in COVID. Oil did have an impact earlier on in the year, but that was dealt with. But then COVID-19, the pandemic has come in, and that's affected deliveries even more dramatically. So helicopter deliveries, we can see then over the last 5 years what we've got here. So the helicopters delivered, this is the primary configuration, this is the primary role that these helicopters each year they have fulfilled. So I've got most of them here, and you can certainly see that there's several existing ones, several that we've always known about, always been aware of. So you've got offshore oil and gas, for instance. You can see the numbers actually coming down quite steeply on this. So from 11% to 6%, it's sort of juggled a little bit to 8%, but then even this year it's only 3% of all deliveries, 3% last year. So the numbers are coming down on that. Wind farms are coming in a little more recently from 2018 to 2020. Numbers have increased there, or certainly proportion has. The rest are there, and the numbers of helicopters, and the configuration of initial delivery are as listed. So looking again at a similar list, it's presenting them, and it's presenting which category of helicopter would be used in that role. So again, I won't go through all of them. You can have a look yourself. But wind farms, so primarily it's like twin engine helicopters. They need to be on standby. They need to be available. They need to take people out, particularly mechanics out, to repair and restore and get wind turbines back in working again. So that's primarily what that role might be. I think if we just have a look at the big picture, one of the busiest, most varied columns really is it's the medium class helicopter. So they've really got an interest nearly in every different sort of role. So that is one of the things being highlighted here. So going into a little bit more detail, we're just having a look at the 2019 new deliveries and the market share. So I mentioned the four main manufacturers. They are here. So the number of helicopters delivered by each in the first graph. So the units 2019. Now, quite interestingly, you can see that Sikorsky, they really only delivered 5 helicopters. But then on the next chart, you can see that those 5 helicopters, they amounted to 3% of the overall share, whereas, let me see, 96 helicopters by the other manufacturers not mentioned here or named here, that amounted to 3.5% of the share. So quite clearly, the Sikorsky helicopters are slightly more higher value items. This is bringing us more up to date, and 2020 new deliveries again up to September this year. And these are by weight category and OEM. So we can see the number of helicopters delivered. Again, very few super, medium, or heavy, which would be primarily in the offshore, but the greatest number or greatest proportion being really in the light single engine. And then the split and share of manufacturers are there too. So the majority again is Airbus helicopters, with Bell coming in second, Leonardo. Now, I just wanted to, introduce before closing. I just wanted to introduce some ideas about the current market. So the current market, again, I'm going to use the five categories of helicopters that we've spoken about already. So here on this slide, we're having a look at the light single engine and the light twin engine helicopters. Now, I've just got the Airbus H125 helicopter here, and as an example, I'm giving you 2018. It's configured for aerial work, and it's 2018 aerial work. The current market value, half-life market value, will be approximately 2.355 million. Now, if you have a look at the slightly bigger picture, what's on the market today? How many 125s are on the market today? Well, there's it's about 2.5% of the overall number in use. So as you can see, the market, the market is it's quite buoyant and it's quite favourable. So the market will hold quite well on that. 22 helicopters for sale. The low end of that would be about 1.75 million US dollars, and the high end would be $3.2 million. So there is an average of the values available or made public. There's an average of about 2.5 million for that. Moving on, another example I've got from the light single engine is the Bell 407. The 71 Bell 407 helicopters on the market, and that's 4.6% of the overall in service. And the range, the actual value range of those helicopters on the market is 1.275 to $3.9 million. So the example I'm giving here is a 2018. It's a light EMS configured helicopter, and I would say it's 2.981 million US dollars for a helicopter configured and equipped and in service in that fashion. Moving on, let's have a look at the two examples of the light twin engine helicopters. I have got both the Bell 49 and another Airbus. It's the Airbus H135. So both of these are 2019 models. The Bell 49 is in an executive or VIP configuration, and I would predict the current market value of that particular type of helicopter is a little over $6.5 million US. So if we consider there are 16 of those type on sale at the moment. It's about 4.4%, and the price range is it's a little bit lower than I'm predicting for that particular model, but the range that's made public is 3.75 to 4.995 million US, and the average price is $4.416 million. So that's the range we've got. The H135, I've got here is, yeah, it's serving offshore, so it's equipped for offshore duties, and it's supporting the wind turbine. So that helicopter, there are only 3 H135s on the market for sale, and that that equates to 1.6% of the overall number, and there are no publicly there's no public values made available for those, but using my own network, using my own connection, and using what I already know about the helicopter, I would suggest that yeah, 6.347 is an approximate value for that. Okay, just before we move on, while looking at the light single, the light twin engine helicopters, they do have particularly good use at this time. So during COVID, they're particularly useful in many different aspects. They can change, they can serve in many different roles, and one of the main ones is EMS, is support of the medical services, and they are being used worldwide for that particular reason, and they can move people to hospital care pretty quickly. So there is a considerable value held on to these helicopters for that reason. The market it's a bit held back at the moment, but I would certainly not knock them for that in this climate. Okay, so moving on, we look at the next couple of categories. We have medium weight helicopters, and then a slightly more recently introduced category, the super medium helicopter. I've got the Leonardo AW139 and the Sikorsky S76D model, and if we have a look at those, they are the AW139. I've got given the example of a 2016. That's year of build delivery, and it's a search and rescue configured. And it's got a market value of a little over $12.5 million US. And if we take a look at the AW139, there are currently 27 of those known for sale or public market for sale, and that is still only 2.7% of the entire fleet. And the price ranges, the price range here is 4.95 to $9.65 million, and there's an average of just under $7 million. Now the helicopter I have here is it's relatively new, and it's configured for search and rescue, so the market value will hold, and it will be slightly higher for that reason. The other medium helicopter I've got is the Sikorsky S76D. This is slightly older than the 139. It's a 2014. It's configured for offshore support, and I'm seeing a current market value of a little over $9 million. Now, there's currently 9 of these on the market, but that equates to 12.7% of the S76D models that are in service today. Okay, so just moving on, the super mediums, I've got 2 examples there for the super medium, the H175 and the W189. The H175 is it's a utility offshore, so it's an offshore support helicopter, and I've got a full life market value here of just a little shy of 16 million US dollars, and that's for a 2018 model. And the 189 is a little over, it's a 2017, and this configuration at this time, it's a Coast Guard search and rescue helicopter at a little over 17.5 million US dollars, and that's the current market value. And those values, again, those values are naturally going to be affected. They're going to be affected by the price of oil, and the utilization will certainly rise and fall for that reason. And as we saw earlier in a previous slide, the actual number of offshore platforms in use, that's dropped quite dramatically over the last 12 months. So therefore, utilization will have dropped, and the requirement to replace aging helicopters, it's not quite going to be there, and the wish to expand existing fleets is not going to be quite there either. So that does affect the value, affects the value quite dramatically. So there is a smaller number of these, available for sale. In fact, if you see the 175 and the 189, there are none of those listed on the, listed in, or advertised for sale publicly. So that's one reason the value's not quite going to be there. Leasing, I can say the leasing market and all of these is pretty robust. It's pretty strong, and leases tend to last. They tend to last a little more than 3 to 5 years. So if they're on lease, then they'll ride through this. Some will be coming to an end of lease, and that is when questions rise about renewing lease or just handing the helicopter back to the lessor. I've mentioned a little about transactions, or certainly the number available in each category. Yeah, I think it's very difficult to sell when utilization is quite low or lower than usual. People are not going to want to increase their fleet or number of helicopters they've got, so that itself will come alongside or come into thought. And the value, I think I've mentioned value, and I've mentioned the reason, and utilization going down, the requirements going down, the market and the need, so they don't quite exist. So they, holding value is even difficult in that line. So offshore down slightly for those reasons. Okay. Finally, in the weight category, we do come to the heavy. So the heavy helicopter, the higher end asset, and here we have the Airbus H225 or the Super Puma. We've got the Sikorsky S92A. Now, both of these will have had a large proportion serving offshore. I think firstly the 225 configuration I've offered up here is utility, with a full life market value of just shy of 9 million US dollars, and that's a 2015 model. The S92, the S92A, is a 2018 model, and it's an offshore support helicopter, and it does have a full life market value of little over 26.5 million US dollars. These, I I mentioned particularly on the offshore, nearly 50% of these offshore helicopters are leased. So lease is stable. If it can ride through this time, then the market's doing quite well, or it's still holding. The industry's holding itself quite well. Transactions are very limited, certainly on the used market. We've only got 6 listed S92s on the market for sale, and that would equate to 2.1% of the operational fleet. So it does appear that certainly does appear that there's few available in the used market. Utilization levels, though, are not quite what they once were. Again, going back to the slide shown earlier, it's the number of offshore platforms in use. These helicopters, they support these offshore platforms, and if those offshore platforms are not in use, then that reduces the number and the requirement for offshore helicopter support. So these helicopters feel that quite dramatically. So leasing for both of these is particularly good. Transactions are they're there, but there's very infrequent, and utilization levels are dropping for the reasons I've said. And yeah, the values are softening. They're extremely soft. And if you do want to sell, then yeah, people are not going to pay significantly for them. That is probably what I've got to say. I'll mention just briefly. I'll mention the Airbus helicopter 225. There was an accident. There was a fatal accident in 2016, and then the entire fleet of offshore helicopters was grounded for some time, and it's never recovered from that. It has gone back into service in different areas, particularly with law enforcement, with UN support. There's other areas that the helicopter can go, but it will never probably recover its place in the market. Well, let's just have a quick touch on future developments. I just mentioned some here. We've got some tilt rotor by Leonardo helicopters. That's making progress. There's firm orders, and there's certainly interest in that. And that would serve in some capacity in the distant offshore platforms, and also search and rescue and air ambulance. So there are some particular roles that would serve extremely well. In Airbus, Airbus made a step, and they've got their upgraded 5-blade 145 D3 model coming in. So the retrofit and new orders will all be in this form from now on. And their H160, it's the medium. That's expected to come in fairly soon. And Sikorsky, we've mentioned the S92A. Well, they've got the S92A Plus, which is a retrofit or upgrade, and the S92B, which is a new model. They are all still expected, and they will come in over the next year or two. There is interest, and some of that equipment has been bought, and some orders may be coming in. The Bell 525 Relentless is the other super medium helicopter that is coming in. It's coming in to challenge the Airbus H175 and the Leonardo helicopters AW189. So that's the sort of area that's aiming for. And the other area of interest is the acquisition by Leonardo Helicopters of the Copter Group, the Swiss helicopter 09. So that is the helicopter they bought in, and to them that is part of their family, or it increases their width or spread across the size range and category range. So again, it's a light single engine helicopter, but it certainly helps fill in some space in its wide stream. Okay, just before I wrap up, there's some key takeaways I would like you to have. So naturally there's some low levels of growth I would expect to continue, and to bear in mind the market does remain challenging. The reliance for the helicopter industry on offshore activity, oil and gas, is it's still there, and it will still be there. Although offshore wind turbine, offshore wind farms, they are beginning to come in, and that will help. That will help ease the pain, or ease anything to do with the offshore helicopter industry. The oil price, yeah, the oil price does naturally affect utilization levels, which in turn do affect the price and value of helicopters in the used helicopter market. We've seen this year particularly unusual and very unexpected, but the COVID-19, it does have some effect, and it has had some effect on helicopters. Travel restrictions have meant people can't move around, and then they do not rely on helicopters for their journeys beyond that. So that has affected some aspects and some parts of the industry. Key market recoveries, or there's certain markets which have definitely been hampered by COVID-19. That will take some time just to pick up. Bear in mind, diversification is strength, and the lessors in particular that survive this, they are the ones who do not overexpose themselves to the offshore industry. They have to be able to rely on many of the other areas that I've suggested. I suggested earlier that helicopters were configured for, they were used in. The shifting demand, yes. I think the final thing to mention then is when helicopters do come to the end of their lives and it's no longer economic to fly or to use them. Some of them, there's definitely this high value items on these helicopters which can be recycled. They can be brought in and reused on existing models that still remain airworthy. And I give that example there as a Sikorsky S-76. So there's definitely parts in some of the older S-76s that can be recycled, brought in, kept, used as a store, and then brought in during maintenance, during repair, during any necessary requirements. So I'm going to wrap up, and I'm going to thank you very much for listening. And please, if there is anything further you wish to ask, please come back to IBA. Thank you.